Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone is suitably caffeinated. Our challenge this morning is to, capitalise on that caffeine and hopefully keep you off your phones. So that's our challenge. Make it interesting enough that you aren't all looking down, because I know we all do it. So as Kim said, top 5 things to know about enterprise VR training. To be fair, top 5 is pretty hard. There's an awful lot of things in here, and it's not necessarily just related to VR training. A lot of the things we're going to talk about this morning, you could actually think across a number of different technologies. They're kind of guiding principles. So it's quite a challenge to get it down to 5, but we managed to do that. So really quickly, what we'll be going through between Sophie and myself is buy or build, pretty self-explanatory. Should you be looking to build your own, or should you go and buy software off the shelf? Don't forget the users. People do. Seems obvious. And some of these you'll go, yeah, of course. People do get these things wrong. Data is king. People forget about data. Seems surprising, but it is very important. Plan for success. Once again, people do pilots and they don't think, well, what if this works? Like, oh, it's worked. How do we roll this out now? I don't know. Then it dies. And the hype, metaverse, all these sorts of things. I have a love-hate relationship with the word metaverse. We'll talk a little bit about the hype. So those are the 5 things we're gonna run through. Really quickly, a little bit about myself. So Chief Marketing Officer of the Glimpse Group. We are a NASDAQ-listed US company formed in 2016. And we consider ourselves, perhaps slightly grandly, but we're, if not the biggest, one of the biggest independent virtual reality and augmented reality suppliers in the market. So we have quite an interesting niche. Our model is we have an ecosystem of subsidiaries. So we have multiple solutions across different sectors and across different technologies. So what you have is Glimpse at the center. We have all these wonderful subsidiaries who operate as fairly differential sort of companies, but under the Glimpse umbrella, and we offer them sort of centralized services, part of which is marketing. So it's probably the biggest immersive tech company you haven't heard of yet. So, Sophie, over to you.
Thanks, James. So hi everyone, I'm Sophie and I'm the co-founder and CEO of VirtualSpeech. VirtualSpeech is an online education platform that blends e-learning with practice and training in virtual reality. And we started at the end of 2015 as the first virtual reality app to overcome a fear of public speaking because of our own fears of public speaking. So for me, let's call a spade a spade. I had social anxiety. I couldn't even order my own food in a restaurant because I was too scared of that even one-on-one public interaction. So we created this app to provide a psychologically safe place to practice something like public speaking and build confidence and competence. So yeah, that was us 7 years ago. So if we fast forward to now. So now we have a catalogue of about 30 courses, all focused on soft skills, so public speaking, sales, leadership communication, active listening, job interviews, business ethics, and so on. We've helped over 370,000 people across 130 countries to improve their confidence and skills. And some of our clients include world-leading business schools like Warwick Business School, IE Business School, and then multinationals like PwC, Accenture, Vodafone, Deutsche Telekom, and so on.
I think what's great there, Sophie, is your public speaking training works, right? Look at you.
Wow,
You went from socially anxious to...
Well, yeah, don't judge me too harshly. I went from not being able to speak.
I tell you what, it's, it obviously works.
Thanks, Dave.
So just before we dive into the top 5, I think it's quite interesting to put a bit of context on all this. And context comes from this term that I bounced into a few months back called technoptimist, right? It's a made-up word. You can use it if you want, but you may get laughed at because it's not real. But it is a word that sort of is out there. And a technoptimist is someone who looks at everything, all the optimistic things technology can bring, all the benefits you can get for it. So I'd imagine pretty much 90% of the people in this room are technoptimists, right? Because you're all here, you're at a tech conference, so you fit in that bucket. So what that means is you have a naturally positive view of any sort of technological solution. So it got me thinking. I thought, well, that's kind of like, it's all good, it's the good thing. And I sort of went into a Star Wars analogy. I don't quite know why, but it seemed quite fun. And so it's kind of like, well, that's kind of Luke Skywalker, right? It's all good, everything's great, everything's going to be good. And I thought, well, if that's the Luke Skywalker, is there a Darth Vader? Is there a flip side to technoptimist? So I went and had a bit of a look, and there is. Even sillier word, tech depressimist, right? So you've got to detect depressives. So there are people who are so negative about technology, they just think it's going to make things worse, right? So, if you sit next to a technoptimist out here in the audience, you may suddenly sort of feel very depressed about the whole thing and start, walking out the door. So it's kind of like the yin and yang, right? And I think we naturally onto the technoptimist side, okay, which is a good thing, but it sometimes can mean you look at things a little overly positively. So I think what you should do with technoptimists is kind of be a pragmatic technoptimist, right? Look at things, yes, see the benefits, but also question it, right? Also dig into it and see what's really behind it. So just have that sort of questioning outlook, I think, with technology is good. And to overwork my Star Wars analogy, I kind of figured that's kind of Han Solo, right? He's a little bit cynical. He looks at stuff and he's not really sure about it. So think of yourself more Han Solo than Luke Skywalker, and I think that will serve you well. So that's a bit of context for where we're going to be.
Okay, let's kick things off. So we'll start with buy or build. So I know that a lot of people in the audience are more techies and probably more on the tech side. But this one focuses a bit more on getting into the mindset of your customer and your client. So one of the first questions they'll ask themselves is, do they want off-the-shelf content or do they want customized content? And I would say the biggest two dependables there are about scope and the learning objectives they want to achieve, and budget as well. So when we first started, so if we look back to 5 years ago, and the VR industry looked very different then as well, we would sometimes have people coming to us who wanted entirely bespoke environments built, and we'd talk about budget, and their budget would be like £5,000. So that's not quite a customised budget. So I think people sometimes come to us as well because off-the-shelf content can be a good stepping stone into the more customised environments. But then there are obviously situations where customised is needed. So if somebody's doing an onboarding training program, then that's going to look very different from one company to another. Similarly, if they use it as part of their recruitment process, that looks very different one company to another as well. So yeah, at VirtualSpeech we focus on the off-the-shelf content, so that's a very easy entry point. Not suitable for everyone, and we are very honest with people if it's not suitable for them. But if people are looking for kind of soft skills topics and looking just as a way into VR training, then that is a good segue in. It all depends really on the learning objective mainly and the experience for the learners. Which brings us on to a very important topic of don't forget the users, which sounds very obvious, but I would say it's surprisingly not in reality. So VR learning isn't about the VR. It's about providing an effective learning experience and achieving pre-agreed learning objectives. So I think it's quite common for people to get carried away with the tech and all of the fantastic things VR can do, all of the features and functionalities, but I sometimes think we need to step back and think, do the learners actually want that? Like, for example, facial expressions from a VR creator perspective, I think, wow, that's really cool, we could track this, we could track that, but actually, is that valuable data for the learner? You really need to ask them, because some people also might find that quite creepy. I would also say it's important to get all stakeholders on board with it being learner focused, especially with the hype around VR and metaverse and so on. Recently, we've had quite a few companies contact us who have heard metaverse, have heard VR, and they want to do something, but they kind of don't really care what or about the results. So that's kind of destined to fail. Similarly, even before the pandemic, I remember going to trade shows and people would have VR experiences at their booth just to get people in. It's important to remember that from a training perspective, you need to create effective, engaging learning experiences. You're not creating like Ricky's plank or a marketing material. You actually need to create real value with that. I would also say you need to think about what is the most effective approach for the learner. So is it a standalone VR experience? Is it a hybrid approach? Is it a tribrid approach where you combine face-to-face facilitation, e-learning and VR? Or do you actually not need VR as well? Like, are you just doing it to look innovative, or does it actually have real use? So we're big believers in not using VR for the sake of it and just using it as a complementary tool to other learning methods.
I like tribrid.
I like that word, yeah.
I haven't heard that. It's a good one. And I think what's really important coming out of what Sophie said as well is I think there is great responsibility on the supplier side to deploy this technology in the right way. It's easy to take the quick buck and run and go, it's not really the best use, but we'll jam it in there. And you can do that. I do think that's a very short-term approach. What that means is that customer may go away and they can't really see the return on investment on it because it's not the best use for that technology at that point. And then they'll kind of write it off. So you may have got that 50K, 100K budget initially come in, but then you're not actually getting anything in the longer term. So I think having the courage to turn stuff away can actually play out better in the long run. It's hard, and sometimes you don't have that luxury. But if there is the opportunity to say that is not the best use, I think as a supplier that puts you in a far better spot to really, really expand on that later on. It's not easily done, and it's all very well me to say that up here. The reality is
definitely.
You need revenue. So I get it. It's a balance, and it's not an easy balance. So data, Sophie touched on it. Data is king. It really is, because part of that proof of the value of any of these things you do, be it VR training, be it another use of the technology, is like, how does it come back down to the data you get out of it? What is it improving? What are the benefits that people have got from it? And too often, it is an afterthought. Literally, people are just like, oh yeah, well, we kind of, we got a little bit of feedback and it was pretty positive, whatever. And that just doesn't work, right? That is just not going to cut it when you go to your CFO or whoever it is where you're trying to get that budget or the kicking on into a rollout. It's just not going to work. But it's amazing, right? It's amazing. How many people have seen a quote like this, right? If you actually dig into what this is, so it just says 99% of employees who tried the VR training felt it would help them improve their performance. I hate those stats, right? I really do, because they don't help anyone. Basically what it is, and in this example, I won't name who it is, but in this example, it's a global logistics company, and they were doing warehouse training, right? And how to stack, big ULDs, the things that go on to airplanes. And actually, it's really important, and it's a great use of the technology, by the way, because if there are any gaps in this thing, they're flying air. Okay? They are literally flying air across the Atlantic, and it's costing money. So if you stack it right, it's brilliant. These are warehouse workers. They've just had this VR experience, which is gamified, by the way. It's superb, brilliant. What do you think they're going to say? They're used to getting hit over the head with a PowerPoint. Oh, God, isn't that boring? I've got to do more training. They were coming back and asking to do this training again. So of course they're going to say, yeah, this is great. I love it. Yeah, really, I'm going to definitely be a lot better at my job. Yeah, it's amazing tech. So these things really, I think, are a real killer for the industry, and we need to move beyond that. And we are kind of moving beyond that. An example of moving beyond that is from a study that Thomas Bonnet ran out of Cambridge University. I love Thomas. He's a great guy. He also has the best title, Head of Cyber Human Lab. Right? And when I said to him, I said, Thomas, you have the best title. He was like, really? Because he's just into his tech. He's just like, really? I'm like, yeah, I'm in marketing. That's a cool title. He's like, all right, move on. But the important thing here is, look at that, right? So they ran a test. This was on apprentices putting together a gearbox for John Deere. And so what you get out of this is like 55% faster task completion rates. That is really tangible, right? That's really important. Faster isn't always better, by the way. In this case, it was. So more of those stats, that is where the industry needs to be. And we are moving that way. They're just slow coming out. Lots of customers aren't keen to share this data, which I understand, really frustrating. And then the different types of data, I'm not going to dwell on this too long, but the things that you can capture, amongst others. But the core things, obviously with all the eye tracking coming in, with all the new headsets, that's a huge benefit. Yes, there are big security issues. That could be a different track. Any interaction in that virtual space can be tracked. You can be capturing voice, and of course biometrics. All these things are now starting to play in more as it gets integrated into the hardware, making the data more valuable, making the use cases stronger, ROI, etc. Technology adoption kicks on. So, all about data.
Which nicely leads us on to planning for success. So, it might be easy to get a pilot through the door with all the metaverse hype, but if you actually want a wider rollout, you're going to have to get real results from that. So we put together this planning checklist for you and your clients to make sure that you have a successful pilot or proof of concept, and then you can have a wider rollout and scale your VR training. So the first thing is definitely, what is the problem you're trying to solve? So again, that's coming back to focusing on the learning objectives first and the VR tech side secondary to that. And learning about how the company does their training already and why they're looking into VR and what VR can help them to achieve. Another thing that is very important when conducting the pilot proof of concept is to identify the right use case and user group. So, for example, I would never recommend forcing VR training onto someone and having it more as an opt-in solution. And identifying that right group who will get you the feedback that you want. So, for example, if you're doing sales training, could you do that pilot with new graduates into the sales team? Or if you're doing leadership training, could you do that with new first-time managers? And then you can get the results from them and see how it scales out. I won't talk too much about measuring success because James has just talked about that. The one thing I will touch on there is the difference between measuring success for soft skills and then more manual skills, hard skills, and the value of those metrics as well. So, for example, if you have something like fire safety training, the time it takes to do one action to another is an important metric to track, because that could literally be the difference between life and death. But if you're learning something like presentations, the time it takes for you to walk to your podium before you start speaking is not really a useful or interesting metric. So it's about knowing the value of each metric that you're tracking as well. Something else I would recommend from a supplier point of view is to involve multiple stakeholders early on. So I think we're all familiar with the length of time in enterprise sales cycles. And this is about identifying any potential roadblocks or problems early on. So with something like VR, the IT and security team will get involved. So try and get those conversations happening early on so you can address any of those issues early on, rather than agreeing on this amazing thing with the L&D team and then getting to security and realizing that they need a certain protocol that you don't have. And my final 2 points in terms of planning for success are considering accessibility and onboarding, which all comes back to the importance of the learner's experience. So from an accessibility point of view, there probably will be some people who don't want to use a VR headset, or they can't use a VR headset for a number of reasons. So I would, just as like a baseline, recommend offering a desktop version too for those people. Obviously, it won't be immersive, but they won't be entirely left out of the training. And also more specific things. So, for example, if you are doing an assessment in VR, be careful around like the colours that you have in there, because if, say, somebody's like colourblind, and they will interpret those colours differently than someone who's not. So you need to make sure that it's fair and a level playing field there. And finally, the onboarding experience. So the learner journey doesn't just start once they put on the headset. If you just go in and put a headset on someone, they might not know what to do. It's probably their first time using VR as well. So you want to keep the whole learner journey as simple as possible. And that even starts before they've put the headset on with orientation and onboarding. So that could look like having train the trainer sessions, or having an orientation session with the pilot participants as well, so that people are more familiar with VR. You're not just saying, okay, 20 minutes, do this, but they've never put on a headset. They don't know how to use the controls. So having enough material and collateral to help the learner and make it as seamless as possible. And then they're more likely to have a positive experience, get good results, wider rollout, happy days.
Great. Thanks, Sophie. On to the last point, my favourite. Sophie's already touched on the fact she's had people come to her and say, we want to do something in the metaverse, whatever. Everyone's had those conversations, right? And there's good and bad with that. You've got to just try and approach them in the right way, that sort of responsible piece. So if we talk about hype, does Anyone remember what year this was? Remember what year? 2016. Yeah, so, and this has haunted Magic Leap. Haunted, but, you could almost say it's part of the reason they've basically reinvented themselves as a company. But, a classic example. You look at the people in the front, there's no headsets in sight, there's nothing. It came out and everyone was like, oh my God, this is going to revolutionize the world. And of course, it was just complete PR. What I won't say on stage. So, which brings me on to a very clever chap. Brilliant guy, really like this chap, Roy Amara. Look him up, very, very smart. And he came up with something, well, he didn't come up with it, and he was quite embarrassed actually, but it's called Amara's Law, and he was very modest and didn't want to be credited with it. But basically what he says is we overestimate the impact of new technology in the short run, and then we underestimate it in the long run. We basically get super excited in the short run and go, oh my God, this metaverse thing, it's going to change everything, it's awesome, great, where can I get one? Oh no, we're probably 10 years off. So, what? Oh God, it's crap. Or they don't even realize that it's 10 years off and they just think it doesn't work, right? So this is Amara's Law. I just love this. It applied to VR probably 2 years ago before enterprise kind of grasped it. It's now the metaverse. So what you have is you have the evolution of the technology and then the estimation of the sort of general public. And I think at the moment we're in a tricky spot. The metaverse, that love-hate thing, what it's done and what it hasn't done, it spawns these headlines. This bottom one is obviously my favorite. The metaverse, is it alive or is it dead? You get to those. We had that with VR, and you now got it. The metaverse is dead, it's crap, it doesn't work. It's just rubbish, forget it. Well, that's because it's kind of a mispositioned, misplaced. And you know what, this is a bit of a cycle, right? From 2000, the good old Daily Fail, it's, people, the internet's rubbish. It doesn't work, we're off. We're done, we're out of here. So it's like, this has got precedent, right? So we shouldn't worry too much about it. It's just a bit frustrating, right? So Amara's Law absolutely nails it at the moment, really, really hits, I think, where we're at with the metaverse. So, what that leaves us is, don't fall in love with the technology, right? Fall in love with what it can do, understand what it can do, understand what it can achieve, come back to Sophie's checklist, all those things that you do with anything else, right? It's just because this is shiny new technology, we tend to get a bit carried away and we sort of get a bit heavily into it. So just, position the hype in the right way, discount the rubbish, take on board what matters, just as you do with anything. So thank you, that brings us to the end. I've come up with a new term, should anyone care to use it, which is a tech pragnoptimist. So if you want to use that, hashtag it, I'm sure it's trending massively. But, more hyphens you get in, the better. So, think of us, let's all leave this room as tech pragnoptimists, bit of Han Solo, all these sorts of things. So I think we're pretty much out of time. But thank you all very much. Sophie, thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe.
Great job. And we may have a question or two, depending on the time. I don't know.
I think you have time for one question.
One? Oh, better
just
be.
one.
Good one. Oh, no, not even taking the one slot. We've
covered everything.
We've covered everything. That's fine. We're all good. We're all good. Let's leave, friends. Thanks very much.
Thank you.